My name's Thomas Whitfield. I was 17 years old when I enlisted in the Confederate Army in the spring of 1861. Seems like another life now. Hell, seems like another world. I grew up in Richmond, right on Grace Street, near the Capitol. My father owned a small tobacco warehouse on Carey Street. Nothing fancy, but it kept food on the table. We weren't plantation folk with slaves and grand houses, just working people trying to get by. But when Virginia seceded in April of '61, every able-bodied man felt the pull. The speeches on Capitol Square, the parades down Broad Street, the bands playing Dixie until your ears rang. They told us we'd be defending our homes, our way of life, our very soil from northern aggression. Said it'd be over by Christmas. 4 years, 4 long, bloody years. I served with the 12th Virginia Infantry, Company D, saw action at Seven Pines, where the mud was so thick you could lose a boot with every step. Malvern Hill, where we charged up that slope into canister shot that cut men in half. Gettysburg, 3 days of hell I still can't fully remember. Watched boys I grew up with, boys I'd known since we were children playing in the James River, die in fields far from home. James Morton, William Cabell, young Samuel Price, who'd just turned 16. But nothing prepared me for watching Richmond die. By early 1865, we all knew it was coming. You could feel it in the air like a coming storm. The lines at Petersburg, just 20 miles south, were crumbling. Food was scarce, had been for months. A pound of bacon cost $10 in Confederate scrip. Women and children were starving in the streets, their faces hollow and gray, while we pretended we were still fighting for something real, something worth all this suffering. I'd been wounded at Fort Stedman in late March, took shrapnel in my left leg from a shell burst, so they sent me back to Richmond to recover at Chimborazo Hospital. I thought I was lucky, thought I'd escaped the worst of it. I was wrong. That last week of March, the city had this strange quality to it. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the axe to fall. You'd see government clerks burning papers in the streets, smoke rising from a dozen buildings. Families packing wagons in the middle of the night, heading west or south, anywhere but here. President Davis still came to St. Paul's Church on Sunday, sitting in his pew, acting like nothing was wrong, but we all knew. Even the church bells sounded different somehow, like they were tolling for something already dead. We all knew the end was here. Sunday, April 2nd, 1865. I was sitting on the steps of my parents' house when I heard the church bells ringing all across the city. Not the normal Sunday morning bells. These were frantic, desperate. Something was wrong. Then I saw him, a telegraph messenger running full sprint down Grace Street, his face white as a sheet. People started pouring out of St. Paul's Church, President Davis among them. I'd never seen him move so fast. The look on his face told you everything you needed to know. Petersburg had fallen. Lee's lines were broken. The army was retreating west. Richmond had to be evacuated immediately. The city went mad. Within hours, it was chaos, pure chaos. Government officials loading wagons with anything they could carry. The Treasury boys were hauling Confederate gold and documents to the Danville train station. I watched them throw papers into the canal, watched ink run into the water like blood. 4 years of paperwork, 4 years of orders and requisitions and death notices, just floating away. My mother was crying. She'd lived in Richmond her whole life, 52 years. Now we had maybe hours to decide what to take, what to leave behind forever. My father just sat in his chair staring at nothing. His warehouse, his livelihood, everything he'd built, all of it about to become enemy property. The soldiers started setting fires that evening. Orders from above. Burn everything of military value before the Yankees arrive. The tobacco warehouses along the canal, the armory, the arsenal, bridges across the James. They said controlled fires. They said they'd contain it. They lied, or they were fools. Probably both. The wind picked up around midnight. I was standing in the street watching the fires spread from building to building. The heat was incredible. You could feel it blocks away, like standing near a furnace. Sparks were flying everywhere, landing on roofs, catching in the dry wood. The whole business district was starting to burn. People were looting. I saw respectable women smashing store windows on Main Street, grabbing whatever they could. Men rolling barrels of whiskey out of burning warehouses, drinking themselves stupid while the city burned around them. Soldiers who were supposed to be maintaining order were joining in, taking what they could before the Yankees arrived. Richmond wasn't falling. Richmond was destroying itself. And I just stood there watching my whole world burn, too numb to even feel it anymore. By dawn on April 3rd, Richmond looked like a vision of hell itself. The fires had spread through the entire business district, 20 blocks, maybe more. Buildings I'd known my whole life were just shells, walls collapsing inward with roars that sounded like dying animals. The heat was so intense it melted the iron shutters on the windows. Glass was exploding from the heat, raining down on the streets like deadly hail. I tried to help. God knows I tried. My leg was barely healed, but I hobbled down to Carey Street with some other men, thinking we could save my father's warehouse. We couldn't get within 2 blocks. The fire was a living thing, feeding on everything, jumping from building to building faster than we could run. That's when I heard the screaming. Old Mrs. Patterson, she ran a boarding house on Main Street. She was trapped on the 3rd floor. I could see her in the window, beating on the glass, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear over the roar of the flames. Men tried to get to her. They couldn't. The stairs had already collapsed. We just stood there and watched her die. I'd seen men die on battlefields, seen them torn apart by artillery, seen them bleeding out in the mud. But this was different. This was home. This was supposed to be safe. The explosion started around 6 in the morning, the arsenal going up. We'd stored thousands of artillery shells there, and when the fire reached them, the ground shook. Windows shattered blocks away. A chunk of metal the size of a wagon wheel came down on Franklin Street, killing a man instantly. Henry Baker. I'd bought tobacco from him 100 times. The smoke was so thick you could barely breathe. Black, oily smoke that burned your throat and made your eyes stream. People were stumbling around like ghosts, coughing, choking, trying to save something, anything from the flames. And then the Yankees came. I saw them riding down Main Street around 8 o'clock. Union cavalry, their horses picking their way through the rubble and debris. They looked almost as shocked as we were. One of them, a young officer, just sat on his horse staring at the inferno, his mouth hanging open. They started fighting the fires, the Yankees, the enemy. They formed bucket brigades, tore down buildings to create fire breaks, worked alongside the same people they'd been shooting at just days before. I found myself standing next to a Union soldier, both of us passing buckets, both of us too exhausted to care anymore about blue or gray. That's when it hit me, really hit me. We'd done this, not the Yankees. U.S. We'd destroyed our own capital rather than let them have it intact. 4 years of fighting to defend Richmond, and in the end, we burned it ourselves. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so goddamn tragic. By noon, they had the fires mostly under control, but Richmond was gone. The heart of it, anyway. 800 buildings destroyed. Whole blocks reduced to smoking rubble. The smell, burning wood, burning tobacco, something else too. Something sweet and sickening that I didn't want to think about. I sat down on a pile of bricks that used to be someone's home, and I couldn't feel anything anymore. Number. Completely numb. The days after the fires were worse in some ways. The burning was terrible, but at least it was quick. What came after, that was slow, like watching something die by inches. The Union Army occupied the city. They were fair enough, I suppose. Didn't burn what was left, didn't massacre anyone. General Weitzel set up headquarters and started distributing rations. That's how far we'd fallen, taking food from the enemy just to survive. My mother stood in line for Yankee hardtack and salt pork, tears running down her face the whole time. I wandered through the ruins for days, couldn't help myself. Looking for, I don't know what, something familiar maybe. Some piece of the world I'd known. My father's warehouse was just a foundation and some charred timbers. The church where I'd been baptized, gone. The school where I'd learned to read, gone. Even the trees along the streets were burned, their blackened limbs reaching up like skeletal hands. Then came April 9th. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. I heard it from a Union soldier of all people. He wasn't gloating, just stated it matter of fact. Your General Lee surrendered today. War's over. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. I didn't feel anything. Thought I would. Anger, grief, something. But there was nothing. Just that same numbness that had settled over me like a shroud. 4 years. 4 years of fighting, of watching friends die, of believing we were defending something sacred. And it ended with Lee handing his sword to Grant in some parlor while Richmond smoldered. People started coming back to the city, refugees who'd fled during the evacuation. They walked through the streets crying, looking for their homes, finding only ash. I saw Colonel Martin, used to command the 44th Virginia, standing in front of where his house used to be. He was still wearing his uniform, gray and tattered. He just stood there for hours, staring at nothing. The freedmen were celebrating. You could hear them singing at night, praising God for their liberation, and they had every right to. I understood that even then. But it was strange, hearing joy in a city that felt like a graveyard. 2 very different wars ending at the same time, I suppose. Theirs was won. Ours was lost. I tried to help rebuild. We all did. Clearing rubble, salvaging bricks, attempting to piece together something from the ruins. But you can't rebuild what's truly gone. You can build something new, maybe. But the Richmond we knew was dead and buried under all that ash. It was about 3 weeks after the surrender when I finally broke. I was walking past what used to be the Confederate War Department building. Just a pile of rubble now. And I saw this piece of paper stuck in the ruins, half burned, but still readable. It was a requisition form. For shoes. Dated February 1865. Shoes. We'd been fighting a war we'd already lost, and someone was filling out paperwork for shoes that would never come, for soldiers who were already dead or soon would be. The absurdity of it hit me all at once, and I started laughing. Couldn't stop. People stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I walked down to the James River that night, stood on the bank where the bridges used to be, looking at the charred pilings sticking up out of the water like broken teeth. I thought about walking in, just walking in and not stopping. It would have been easy, so easy, but I didn't. Don't know why. Cowardice, maybe. Or maybe I was already too numb to even manage that. That's when I saw him. Robert Dawson. We'd enlisted together first day of the war, fought side by side at Malvern Hill. I thought he'd died at Gettysburg, saw him go down and never get back up. But here he was, alive, missing an arm, thin as a rail, but alive. We just looked at each other for a long moment. Then he said, "Tom, you made it." "Yeah," I said. I made it. We both knew what a lie that was. We'd survived, sure. Our bodies were still breathing, still moving, but we hadn't made it. Not really. The boys who'd enlisted together in 1861, full of fire and certainty they were dead, died somewhere between Seven Pines and here. We sat on the riverbank and didn't say much. What was there to say? The war was over. Richmond was in ruins. Everything we'd fought for was ash and memory. We'd given 4 years of our lives, watched our friends die, killed men ourselves, and for what? For this. For sitting on a riverbank in a destroyed city, 2 ghosts pretending to be alive. Robert started crying, not sobbing, just quiet tears running down his face. I put my hand on his shoulder, his only shoulder, and we sat there as the sun went down over the ruins of Richmond. That was my breaking point. Not the fires, not the surrender. That moment. Realizing that survival wasn't victory. It was just survival. And sometimes that's the cruelest thing of all. I'm 89 years old now. Been 68 years since Richmond burned. 68 years, and I still see it when I close my eyes. Richmond rebuilt, of course. Cities always do. New buildings rose from the ashes. Commerce returned. The railroads got fixed. The bridges rebuilt. Within a decade, you could barely tell there'd been a fire at all, at least not if you didn't know where to look. But I know where to look. I can see the scars underneath, like old wounds that never quite healed right. My father never recovered. He tried to rebuild the warehouse, but his heart wasn't in it. He died in 1872, and I think part of him had been dead since that April night in 1865. My mother lived longer, but she was never the same either. She'd flinch at the sound of church bells for the rest of her life. I married. Had children, grandchildren. Built a decent life, I suppose. But my wife, God rest her, she used to say I was never really there. Not all of me, anyway. Part of me stayed behind in those burning streets, sitting on that riverbank with Robert Dawson, watching the sun set on a dead world. They have parades now, Confederate Memorial Days, old veterans gathering to talk about the glory and the lost cause. I don't go. Can't stomach it. There was no glory in what I saw. No noble cause worth what it cost. Just young men dying for old men's pride, and a city destroying itself rather than admit defeat. People ask me about the war sometimes. Young people, usually. Want to hear war stories, tales of heroism and brotherhood. I tell them what I tell you now. War isn't a story. It's not an adventure. It's the end of everything you thought you knew about the world and yourself. I can still smell Richmond burning. That's the thing that haunts me most. The smell. Burning wood, burning tobacco, burning everything. It gets in your clothes, your hair, your lungs, and it never really leaves. 68 years later, sometimes I'll be sitting on my porch and a breeze will blow just right, and I'm back there. April 1865, watching my world end. Robert Dawson killed himself in 1873, hung himself in his barn. He'd seemed fine, married, had a farm, was making a go of it. But I understood. Sometimes survival is just death taking its time. I think about all the boys who died. James Morton at Seven Pines, William Cabell at Malvern Hill, young Samuel Price, who never saw 17. They're the lucky ones, in a way. They died believing in something. The rest of us had to live long enough to learn it was all for nothing. So when people talk about the war between the states, about states' rights and Southern honor and the lost cause, I stay quiet. Let them have their myths. But I know the truth. I lived it. We lost more than the war in April 1865. We lost our innocence, our faith, our certainty that the world made sense. And some of us never came back. We're still there, walking through burning streets, watching our homes turn to ash, wondering what the hell it was all for. I survived Richmond, but Richmond never let go of me, and it never will.